Chapter 29. Vittoria shivered with cold. Her dress lay damp across her shoulders and back, and her teeth chattered like old bones. Every now and then, a rustle came from beyond the cell, but the darkness was pervasive. At least they hadn't kept her shackles on in here. When she felt along the wall behind her, wet rock met her fingertips. A door of thick iron bars blocked her exit from the small cell, which was 5 paces wide at its broadest. How much time had passed since Romeo had her locked in this dent in the rock? She had no idea. It felt like hours. Every now and then, Romeo's murmurs broke the silence. She strained to hear, unable to make out even the faintest consonants. 2 witches had dragged her here and slammed the door after her. Other voices rotated through Romeo's little lair, mostly female. Zuri had taught her a spell to amplify sounds, but she had no idea if Romeo would be able to detect the magic. Undoubtedly. But would he be paying attention to it? Would magic even work down here? Was Romeo preparing to fight Mateo and sending messages about his conspiracy with Xavier? The witches speaking with Romeo could be rebel messengers like Sannara. They might be bringing information about what was happening above ground. But despite the temptation, she'd wait just in case. The right moment would present itself. Not many more minutes passed before a voice called to Romeo from deeper in the caverns. His footsteps retreated. Vittoria knew that voice. Sannara. Vittoria cast the simple sound-amplifying spell and winced as the grating crunch of shoes on rock rippled through her ears. Every sound was amplified, but at least their words were clear. "Go to the country house," Romeo murmured. "Don't make me order you to do it. It's not safe here, not now." "You want me to abandon you when you need me the most." A rustle of something. Clothing, hair, perhaps? "You serve me best by remaining safe," Romeo said. There was genuine warmth in his words. The cold-hearted man who had kidnapped Eneko couldn't be the same witch. "All of this will mean nothing if we're not together at the end of it, after all we've been through." "She is my sister. My son needs her, Romeo, and you know I will do anything for him that I can." Sannara said it quietly. It sounded more like a statement of fact than a plea. Vittoria's heart pinched. Romeo's tone hardened. "It doesn't change the plan." "Romeo, please." Vittoria's heart slammed in her chest. Did Sannara know he had Eneko? Did she know what kind of monster she loved? "Sannara," Romeo said like a caress. "Trust me, please. We will be together, finally. When all of this comes together, she will—" Silence. A muffled sound, like a kiss. "He has Eneko!" Vittoria screamed. "Sani, he has Eneko. He's holding him hostage so that I'll do what he wants. Save him. By the giver, Sannara, do the right thing for your son. Forget me. Save him." "Eneko?" Sannara whispered. The light beyond the cell brightened. Vittoria barely had time to stop the spell before Romeo appeared in the narrow entryway to her small cavity. He slammed a torch into a holder on the wall and stalked toward her, fury on his face. Vittoria lifted her chin and forced herself not to step back as he approached. With a growl, he grabbed the metal bars in white-knuckled fists. They rattled against the stone. "You know nothing," he snarled. "Nothing." "I know what kind of man you are," she hissed, "and it's not the man that Sannara deserves. You steal children. You betray everyone." "I will save this network. It is my duty." Vittoria stared at him, startled by the unhinged fire in his eyes. Angering Romeo wouldn't help Eneko. In fact, it might make things worse for him. Instead, she had to delay Romeo and buy Sannara time to save Eneko. But would she? Vittoria hated herself for the question. Might Sannara have already known? No, she couldn't have known. Her voice had betrayed her shock. Vittoria steeled her resolve. She couldn't give up hope that Sannara would finally choose her son, would finally do the right thing. She had to at least give her a chance. She swallowed. "I'm sorry, Romeo. I didn't mean to anger you." He glared at her in stoic silence, but her placating humility seemed to do the trick. He stepped back. She followed until the bars stopped her. "Xavier, is it him you're frightened of? Is that who you're trying to please?" "Who said I was frightened?" "Your eyes." She said it softly, and she expected him to reach through the bars and strike her. Instead, his jaw tightened. Then he leaned closer, face almost pressed into the iron. The utter fury of his twisted expression sent a spike of fear all the way into her gut. "You asked about my mare," he murmured hoarsely. His eyes tapered. "Do you really want to know our dark, dark legacy?" At his words, her heart slammed against her chest. Was this some sort of trap? He looked like he wanted to strangle her. She nodded. He laughed, but it was cold. "That means Mateo told you nothing about her." Romeo's brow rose. "With good reason. He didn't want to frighten you away." "No, he didn't tell me." Romeo scoffed. For a second, he seemed at war with himself, an internal struggle visible in his twitching cheeks. Finally, he drew in a deep breath. "Mare was raised as a worker and known for her beauty. She had an older brother, Xavier, who was protective of her." Vittoria mentally shivered. So there was a Xavier, and he was their uncle after all. If Romeo noticed her surprise, he ignored it. "Their parents died in a plague when she was 7 and he was 10. Mare was conscripted to a landowner house, while Xavier worked for a blacksmith. They managed to scrape out a life on the street, created a family of misfits. Over time, their family grew to a neighborhood. They pooled resources and took care of each other. Word spread, more joined." "And so the rebels were born?" she asked when he paused. Firelight flickered in his eyes. "So they were born," he muttered bitterly. "Xavier was an ambitious young man who hated Sodor, my grandpère, the High Priest. Sodor had imposed heavy taxes and tightened his control on the network. By that time, Xavier was 18, Mare was 15. She would have done anything for her brother." Vittoria's stomach clenched as she remembered Zaldar's revelation before the ballroom attack. "She pretended to be a landowner," he had said, "but was actually a rebel. Even Hode was fooled." Water pooled at her bare feet. Her dress trembled from her shivers while she waited for him to continue. Romeo stared at the glimmering rock wall behind Vittoria, seemingly transfixed by the cadence of the story. "A sympathetic landowner named Raphael took her in. He taught her reading, transformation, transportation, simple spells. Magic wasn't yet banned, but few workers knew much of it. Raphael supplied Mare with dresses and jewelry. Just after she turned 17, she entered into society as his niece." There were chilling similarities, though stark differences, between her and Esperanza. The similarities made her ill. Did Romeo see it? Is that why he stared at her with such disdain? "But she wouldn't have been recognized?" she asked. He shrugged. "She could have been, but wasn't." "To what end?" "To gain Peter's attention, of course," he murmured silkily, but there was ice behind his tone. Although she'd expected that truth, it still startled her. Romeo leaned away from the wall, but didn't relax his intent stare, like he wanted to peg Vittoria down and make her suffer for something. "Mare caught Hode's eye at the ball, and they fell in love. They gave Xavier access to Hodor. At the betrothal dinner, Xavier posed as one of Mare's servants and slit Sodor's throat when Sodor left to empty his bladder. A guardian noticed and advanced. He claimed to have cut Xavier's head half off with a sword, but no one found the body, nor a blood trail. It's as if he just vanished. Hode became High Priest at 29. He was 11 years older than Mare." "Did Xavier actually die?" "Mare and Pere were handfasted just before Hode officially took the throne." He ignored her entirely. The hard edges in his voice sharpened, and she wondered if it was because of his Mare or his Pere. "Mare grieved her brother and continued on with the lie, even though she wanted to go back to the rebels. She didn't want to wait around for Hode to find her out. She knew he'd destroy her in the most painful way possible." Vittoria suppressed the urge to gasp. Was that what Hode wanted? To know why Esperanza had stayed with him when she wanted to go? Romeo continued. "She claimed that her feelings for Hode were real, of course, but Mare always knew how to lie. She said she cared for him, loved him, all the while knowing that Hode would eventually find out and kill her. The rebels pressured her to stay and spy while their numbers grew. Then she fell pregnant with Mateo and stayed out of fear. Things could have grown worse for the rebels, but she prevented a lot of deaths. Then she had me a few years later." Thoughts formed in Vittoria's mind like slow swelling clouds. How desperate Esperanza must have felt, torn between her scrabbled-together family and ruthless husband. What daily terror did she endure, knowing Hode's wrath could be directed toward her at any moment? Vittoria recalled the servant with the sewn lips, the heads on the pikes in the street. Was it love or fear that drove Esperanza to stay? And is that what Hode had really wanted to know? "Then Mateo's 10th birthday happened," Romeo murmured, oblivious to her thoughts. His expression had turned hard as stone. "I was 7. We were living in the country because it was safer there and, unbeknownst to me at the time, much easier for the rebels to communicate safely with Mare. The riots had started in earnest. That day, Hode showed up. I remember them arguing. He screamed almost senselessly. I'll never forget his rage. Mare cried. Then he slapped her. He grabbed a knife on his belt and lunged to kill her, but Mateo threw himself between them and fought for her. Hode won, and nearly killed Mateo in the process. Romeo shook his head. He took me, and here we are. An icy feeling settled deep in the pit of her stomach, frozen colder by the depths of the shadows in his eyes. Here we are. What had happened to Romeo in the years between then and now? Was the fury that rolled off him in waves a result of his time with Hode, his grief for Esperanza? Who had loved him? Who had been Romeo's ally? No one, she imagined. Dark legacies, indeed. You weren't there when your mare died, she whispered. That must have been awful. Mateo said she was fonder of you than him. You have your answer now, Vittoria. Mare was a bitter, determined woman who chose the workers over her family. She died alone in the country, the way she deserved. That's all there is to it. Why did she stay? He scoffed. Because she loved the rebels more than she loved anyone. Hode was never able to accept that she turned him into a fool. Vittoria remained silent, her emotions tumultuous after hearing such a bleak history. Her heart ached for Mateo, for Romeo, for Esperanza. Why did you tell me all of this? Romeo hesitated in the doorway. He half turned and said, Because you won't survive the night. As much as I hate Mateo, Before he could say another word, he walked away. The torch remained, flickering on the wall. She stared at the fire longingly, but couldn't feel its heat from here. Romeo's departure gave her space to think, and her chest tightened. For an interminable amount of time, Vittoria paced her cell. She rubbed her arms for warmth, desperately cold. It distracted her, made it difficult to think. Esperanza's story ran through her mind again and again. From Mateo's perspective, and then Romeo's, and then Hode's, and then Zaldar's. The days of Esperanza were interesting, of course, Zaldar had said. She was a beautiful woman, elegant, unnatural in such crowds. Esperanza must have been multifaceted, like a diamond, to harbor such secrets for years. Strong, maybe even bitter, as Romeo had said. How else would she have gained the strength to survive a world that wanted to destroy her? Had it been difficult to stand by, and love or pretend to love, the man who caused such despair for her witches? To be a puppet for her brother, and in fear of her husband? What a horrifying existence. Vittoria's mind spun back to the day she met Hode. There had been real pain, however brief, in his rheumy eyes, deep bitterness. Did Hode just want closure? No, he'd wanted more than that. Hode would have wanted revenge against both Esperanza and Romeo, maybe even Xavier. Was she destined to the same fate as Esperanza? A female voice whispered outside the cell. Moments later, Romeo stepped back into the narrow doorway. A piece of parchment was on fire above his hand. Wish me luck, he said, eyes bright in the light of the flame. He smiled coldly at her. The time is set when I shall kill Mateo. I'm sorry it had to happen this way for you, Vittoria. Once Mateo is dead, you won't matter at all.